And as they,
Okay. So hi, everybody. I'm Brittany. Um, and also Ada's here today, and we're going to be your facilitators for today's PD on using data to move students through MLSS. This was a really big topic to cover. So thank you guys for giving us, if you gave us your feedback, that really helped us focus in a little bit. And hopefully we'll break down some of this into more bite-sized chunks for us to work with. And I know our next PDL is also on MLSS. So hopefully this will kind of be the first step, and then we can move into the next step next time. Is there anybody who did not get the login or the sign in for this? I can only see one more new person, but I'll put that in there again. Okay. So we have three kind of big objectives today. So hopefully today you guys will have a better understanding of the framework for MLSS and how that ties into structured literacy. And then we're also going to analyze or look at how we analyze student data points and align that with the layers of MLSS and structured literacy. And then we're also going to reflect and use some tools that help us implement those data points and really illustrate how to move your students through the layers. If you look on the right-hand side, we kind of have like, the order in which we're going to go through things. The big thing is we are going to ask you guys to use technology today. We have a few Jamboards and stuff, so make sure that you're able to pull up those extra tabs and go back and forth. And then we're also going to make you talk to each other, so be ready to talk as well. Any questions before we get started? No? Okay. Awesome. So we're going to start with kind of like an overview of MLSS. I know that we all probably have seen the MLSS, have heard about it, obviously, but we want to dive a little bit deeper into the understanding of it before we start talking about how to move our students through those layers. If you want to pull up the MLSS guide, you can use that QR code there, or we have a shared folder. Ada, are you going to drop the link to that implementation guide? Okay. So Ada's going to put the link to that implementation guide into the chat as well, so you guys can look at it if you want to. These are all from NMPED, so this is their guidance on how MLSS should be structured and implemented and all of the things. But when we look at those documents, you're going to see two really like graphics that stand out. So I kind of want to give you guys a minute to look at these two graphics and try to think like, what do these mean? So I'm going to give you like a minute of think time. What do they mean? We'll start with this one up here, the circle, and then kind of look at the next one, the rectangle down here. I'm going to give you like a minute of think time. And if you want to pull up the guide, it's in the chat. You'll see this on like the very first few pages. Okay, so how about this first one, the circle one? What do you think this one kind of means? And you guys, you can unmute and say it, or you can type. Oh, go ahead, Pat.
No, I was just going to say, it just means that, the layer 1, 2, and 3 are all encompassed by, those interventions, the decision supports, and then you have your school support, and then your health. Everybody's just hovering and hugging those layers. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah. Yeah, so those layered supports are encompassed. They're surrounded by the best practices that we kind of want to see with MLSS. Data-driven decisions, evidence-based interventions, fluid and layered supports, universal supports for our students. And then it kind of goes out, the school supports, and then the family supports, the community supports. Many influences on students. Yeah, so it is very much influenced by a lot of different factors, right? Deborah, go ahead. I think I see your hand raised.
Didn't want me to say anything. Okay, so and then in the weave of all that, you'll notice that um, the blue is like water because that does stand for how fluid it should be when kids move through the layers, that they don't have to be stuck in a layer. And then all of the components, there's 7 core components in MLSS. So that also shows them, each of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they are set up to be fluid like water, right? Because we want our students to move within them, right? We don't want them to get stuck in one layer or the other. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, this bottom one. This is kind of juxtaposing our previous thought process when it comes to intervention versus now the MLSS thought process when it comes to intervention. So Deborah, go ahead. I see your hand again. Or did you put it down? I thought it came back up. No? Oh, okay, okay. Okay, so what about this one? What do you guys think about this one?
So I typed in the chat that this shows that in the previous model that the tiers were a classification of where students of students, rather than in MLSS it's a classification of the intensity of interventions. So any child can get layer 3 interventions, whereas before only special education's identified kiddos could have tier 3 support.
Yeah, I think that's right on point. So with our previous, the RTL kind of thought process, we very much were classifying students into a tier based on, the level of services that they were getting or level of services that they needed. Whereas now with the MLSS structure, it's a lot less requirement driven, right? Any student can be receiving those layer 3 interventions. Any student can be receiving those layer 2 interventions. And so it's turned from more of a process to a framework of thinking. And that's kind of what we want to really drive home today, is that MLSS should be viewed as a framework and not a process. It's not okay, I need to start a SAT packet on this student, so they have to be receiving tier 2 instruction or layer 2 intervention, right? It's more of a framework of moving students and seeing those interventions improve outcomes. Anything else to add on? No?
Good point, because kids at layer 1 can be placed in SAT if necessary. There's only 6 criteria for what you can, you know, what.
Oh no, I don't know if it's just me, but you're kind of going in and out. Oh no, we might have lost her. Okay, but I think what she was trying to say was that yes, you can have SAT at any layer of intervention. So you can have a student in layer 1 that's being evaluated like for a SAT referral, right? So it's not so much which layer they're in, it's the data you're collecting on them. And Laura says you can expedite the process if needed with the current MLSS structure. So yeah, so it is a little more fluid, right? So we can go ahead and put our kiddos into that layer 3 intervention without having to wait for them to get that special education classification, right? Okay, awesome. So today, these are the 7 kind of components of the MLSS framework. And I think Deborah already kind of hit on that. We are going to really dive into the first 4 today, just because, like we said, this was a huge elephant to kind of bite off of. So we're going to go really hard into that data-driven decision making, those high-quality core instruction and intervention materials, how to create informed and effective leadership systems, and that collaboration process for providing those supports with an S. And we really want to show you guys how we are going to make those interventions support our general curriculum. So we always want to drive home the fact that that layer 1 instruction should be our goal, should be very strong and have those universal supports, and then using those layer 2 and layer 3 interventions to help our kiddos get to that level. Did I forget anything here, Ada?
No, I would say the language here that says leadership. And so I think sometimes we might think that's admin, but we are all teacher leaders on our campuses, right? We all can influence the systems and the processes or the frameworks that we're implementing at our school sites. So leadership as all educators on a campus.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a little bit of like an activity for you guys. So we are going to drop a link to a Jamboard in the chat for you. And on that Jamboard, you'll see basically what's on the screen. And so we've kind of pulled out the big characteristics of each layer of that MLSS intervention. And we want you guys to work in breakout rooms to categorize those characteristics. And I want you to try and see if anything surprised you. If you see anything that was like, oh, I didn't know that was a layer 3 thing as you work. Do you have that link, Ada, or do you want me to put it in there? You got it? Okay. Okay, so we're just gonna do random groupings for breakout rooms. We're gonna have 6 breakout rooms. So when you get there, go to the number slide. They're all the same, but just so we're not all working on one, go to the number slide that matches your breakout room, and you can work from there. We're gonna give you guys 7 minutes to work in there, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about those surprises or characteristics that you saw. Are there any questions before we disperse? You guys understand? Okay. I think everyone made it.
Gals, I am not going to join a breakout room. It's
Okay.
not fair. It's I am an MLSS coach, so I just,
Oh.
if I sit in a room and don't say anything, I'll feel bad. So I'm just going to hang with y'all.
No, I think that's perfect. And if you have anything to interject while we're talking today, we would love to hear it since you're kind of an expert in that field as well.
I will be glad to.
Yeah. Are you a MLSS coach with the REC?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're working with
Yes, this is.
Go ahead.
I don't know if it's my service or what, but I can barely hear people, and I'm sure you're having a hard time with hearing me because I heard Brittany say that earlier. But so I work with SWREC as both a structured literacy coach and an MLSS coach, and I've been an MLSS coach for since the beginning. So I think it was before COVID. That's always the point we kind of judge by, right? So maybe 4 years, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the first year though that we have actually like been able to get into schools. All, before we were assigned to one point of contact for a whole district. Oh, that was hard because of that. And anyhow, long story short, this is the first year that we get to be in schools helping with their PLCs and wherever they are in their journey.
That's great.
Yeah, we were just discussing the MLSS coaches a little bit earlier because somebody had asked who they can reach out to for like support with MLSS. So
yes,
if you're here and
what
somebody thinks, yeah, maybe.
yeah, what happened last year, I think it might have been the year before, but last year for sure, schools had to apply
Yeah.
to have a person that would come onto their campus. So if people missed that or hadn't, see, everybody had an MLSS coach assigned to them at one point. But then I think it was, maybe around this time last year, they put out that application. And so only certain schools got coaches this year if they applied.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that people aren't willing to help them. That's for sure. No, I'd be glad to help somebody get connected with somebody to help them. And depending where they are, we have coaches all the way, all across the state. And I don't know if you guys will have a chance to talk about or if you plan to talk about the Canvas courses. They really are good. I don't know if you had a chance to see any of them, but they're fairly good. And so if they can't get a person because we're at the end of the year now, they could definitely at least get some questions answered by myself or any of the coaches, I'm sure. But, we may have somebody that is near them that could, meet up or something. I'm not sure.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll definitely share that at the end then, especially if the question comes up. I do have a timer going, Ada, as well, if you're concerned about time.
I was just looking at where they're at on the Jamboard. So
Are they pretty much done?
I think the first few something happened to group 3's slides.
Oh no.
See that?
Okay, so group 1's done.
Group 2's still
working.
working.
4, 5,
Mm-hmm.
and 6 is still working. I have a minute and a half left on the timer. Should we just give it a minute and a half?
Yeah, some of them were being creative too with the all students eligible. So they made copies of that and put it in all 3 layers. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah. Because I think the verbiage is all students, some students, and then few students.
Mm-hmm. But all are eligible, I guess. It would be the
Right.
probably be the mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 is still
They're
working
making
now.
copies of all of them, huh? That's so funny. I always think it's interesting how people interpret these, right? Yeah, group 6. All right. It looks like everyone's done now.
Okay.
You tell me when.
We have like 10 seconds on the timer, so whenever.
And 9-8. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm closing the rooms.
Okay.
60 seconds. They'll be back in.
By the way, I don't need anybody to know that I'm a coach, so I'm just gonna sit back.
No worries. Thank you.
But I am glad to help. I'm glad to help.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm gonna give everyone a minute to come back in. I do have the quote unquote answers. They're not like the be all end all answers. We'll talk about it, but I do have the answers up if you want to kind of check how your group did. Okay, so as you're coming back in, because I know everybody, all the rooms are closed now, I do have the quote unquote answers up on the screen. I know that there will probably be some discussion based on what we saw going on the Jamboards, but go ahead and check kind of what we have up here and what you have. Is there anything that is sticking out to you, whether it's a difference or a surprise or something that your group did that you don't see we did on this one? So the biggest thing that Ada and I were noticing that a lot of you were copying and making multiples of that all students eligible sticky note. Why was that?
I think for us, it was more if the student needs it, all students should have access to that. So yes, all students should receive layer 1. Not all students will need layer 3, but all students are eligible if their needs are not being met in layers 1 and 2. That was, I think, our thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a verbiage thing on our end when we were creating these, which is why this is so fun because, you guys tell us, things about things that we didn't even catch when we were going through it ourselves. So you're right. All students are eligible to receive layer 3, layer 2, and layer 1 interventions. All students should be receiving layer 1, right? And the verbiage that they use in the MLSS guide and the MLSS implementation is all for layer 1, some for layer 2, and few for layer 3. So those are kind of the amounts of students that should be getting those layers of intervention. Anything else?
Oops, sorry.
No, go
Our
ahead.
group also mentioned like the intended fluidity through the layers, like, you might be in layer 3 for a little while, but then you're improving, so you can move, back and forth as needed.
Yes, so we don't want a student to be stuck in that layer 3, right? Hopefully they'll move back up to layer 2, or maybe they'll master it and be able to go straight back up to that layer 1, and we'll find another area that maybe they need intervention for, right? So yes, that fluidity is there. Anything else that stood out or that your group talked about? What about progress monitoring? What did you guys notice about the progress monitoring?
It becomes more frequent as you move through the layers.
So if you notice layer 3, they recommend progress monitoring on a weekly basis. So we should be checking in with those students that are receiving that layer 3 intervention more often so that we can more clearly see, oh, hey, they have mastered this or they've made huge improvements, and maybe move them back into that layer 2 intervention. So the progress monitoring really supports the fluidity between the layers. And if we're not doing that progress monitoring effectively, then we're not going to be able to move our students very easily.
Can I share, Brittany? Can
yeah,
I
go
share
ahead.
real quick? I think that's such a shift, and I see that everywhere, because the way it was done before where tier 3, it was like tier 3 special education, don't worry about it, you know, you're just focused on level 2, on tier 2, should I say. But now it's like actually them having to shift to that, to say that, you know, it's more intensive, more targeted, and it's still ongoing for layer 3. So I think, like, for me, that's a big shift that I'm trying to explain to my teachers or get to my teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, and that came up a ton when Ada and I were kind of working through like how to go about this, was that whole data or it didn't happen kind of mindset. And so the fact that we need to be collecting data on all of our students so that we can move them fluidly through each layer is something that is hard to manage for a lot of teachers. So hopefully we'll give you guys some ideas on how to better do that today as well. Okay. Another thing that came up in the feedback form that we got from you guys was kind of the difference between the layer 2 and the layer 3. Did you guys maybe see that a little clearer with this activity? What do you think is the difference between layer 2 and layer 3? It's a hard
How
question.
often and how long?
Yes. Yep. Frequency and duration, right? That is the big difference, because we can have interventionists in layer 2 intervention or in layer 3 intervention. It's really the difference between, okay, we're meeting with this student, you know, every other day, and that's for layer 2 intervention. And then for our layer 3 kiddos, we're meeting with them every day. You know, that's the big difference between the two. And also the progress monitoring. So those students in layer 3, we want to progress monitor more often than the students in layer 2. Okay, before we move on, any
Brittany,
other surprises, comments?
Do you mind if I interject really quickly?
Go for it.
At my school for MLSS, for the 2 times a month progress monitoring, all the teachers are utilizing different tools for that progress monitoring. And even at the grade level, they're not agreeing on what tools they're using. And so the data it's not flowing and it's not consistent. I don't know if you guys are finding that as well, but it appears as though they need to come up with like specific tools that they're using to track that data, because our data is all over the place, and you know the structure is not in place as far as like what tools are we using to collect that data.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to dive a little bit more into that as we work further and further into this PD, but that is something that has come up, right? So what does it mean to do something with fidelity? We always hear that, oh, do it with fidelity, right? But that means that everybody is collecting the same data points. Everybody is collecting that data in the same way at the same time. So it requires that collaboration piece, that communication piece, right? I saw someone's hand. Did somebody have something else to add?
Deborah added in the chat too that even a classroom teacher can provide layer 3 intervention. And so the verbiage in the implementation guide does say a specialized teacher. And so Brittany and I had this reflective conversation around, well, all of our teachers are trained in letters, are they not? And so, and with that, they can get a reading endorsement. So technically, you know, we are building specialized teachers in reading instruction through letters training, even if they don't go for the reading endorsement piece. So that's something to kind of think about, and what might that look like, sound like on your campus, right? When we're saying specialized teachers can provide intervention at layer 2 and layer 3, because that was the question of who does the intervention, right? Does it have to be an interventionist? Does it have to be a special ed teacher? Or can it be a classroom teacher?
Mhm.
Deborah, were you going to add on to that?
I am really struggling with my internet, so I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that about, I think it was Marla's comment that about the tools, you know, in your PLCs you could decide on the tool you use, but it really in order to be empowering for teachers, the PED isn't going to say you must use this tool. You know, it's what is works for your campus, what you all think that is a campus decision. So it is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but the PED won't just give it to you, just like they won't say, okay, here's all the interventions you better do at layer 1 or at layer 2 and so on. We are, as the teachers in the classroom and our teams on campuses, are empowered to make those decisions.
And I think,
Mhm, go
Deb,
ahead.
I'm gonna just piggyback off of what you said too from Marla. These interventions are meant to be so individualized that we're not really norming data to other students. We're really comparing data to that student's own data. So it's not, you know, in an ideal world, we'll have the same tools and we'll all be doing that. But it's not a catastrophe because you're comparing that student to that student. You're not norming, you're not creating Z-scores, you're not creating T-scores, you're not doing any of that. You are just looking at what this student has been doing and what this student can do now after the interventions. So it's super individualized.
And you guys are rock stars, so you keep getting ahead of us. But we are going to talk a little bit about the difference, right, between those screeners or those assessments that we use to see kind of the big picture, as opposed to what progress monitoring looks like, and the difference between what we're comparing it to.
We paid Anne on the side. Thank you, Anne, for that. So let's go into tying it to structured literacy, right? And again, literacy is a beast. There's so many components to structured literacy that, you know, we are trying to implement in the classroom. So just to give us more common language around what does it look like when we're successfully tying structured literacy, or what could it look like when we're tying structured literacy to MLSS. So first and foremost, we know as of 2021 is when state legislation went into play in order to ensure that we are catching our students who are having reading difficulties early in first grade. And so we do administer the dyslexia screener. There are 2 in the state of New Mexico. There's the Lexia or Lexercise, and then the Learn to Read dyslexia screener that we implement. The next one is all districts must have a structured literacy framework. And so they've created that to ensure that they are in compliance with those key components within the structured literacy framework. We also have ensuring that we do have layered literacy interventions for the different components: phonology, orthography, syntax, right, morphology, and so forth, so that we are using high quality instructional materials as well as research and evidence-based screeners. So we want to ensure that whatever screeners or tools that we are using is that they're grounded in, you know, the science of reading and what we know are the development of those skills within those domains. So Also within that is making sure that we as schools have layered supports that are built upon systematic, cumulative, sorry, you can hear my dog, explicit, diagnostic, and multisensory, so that when we are implementing interventions, that they are grounded in those high yield research-based strategies. And then last but not least is that we are gathering data and making sure we're monitoring that. So ensuring that we are talking across the layers, right? Building that collaboration piece, because that's a big piece of MLSS, and making sure that we have systems to track and make sure we're not, missing students and they aren't falling through the cracks. So the next slide shows, and many of us have seen this already, but this is the balanced assessment sort of visual that PED, or this came from, I think, PBS, right, Brittany? That's very similar to the one that PED has around creating a balanced assessment system. So reading this from left to right, we see the first arrow from the bottom to the top. We're moving from low stakes to high stakes assessments. And then in the middle, we see that timeline from August to June. So what should be happening, that frequency, right? Beginning, middle, end of year. And then on the right-hand side, moving to standards, staying grounded in content standards. I always tell my teachers, you in that grade level are the grade level expert. You live and breathe this every day. You're teaching this content every day. So striving to move towards being content, experts in your standards. And so reading from top to bottom, we see we've got the NMASA state summative assessments, right? We take end of year, that's the end all be all in grades 3 and up to see if students are mastering grade level content standards. We have then our interim benchmark, our adaptive, and then drilling all the way down to that classroom level. I'm not going to go too much into this because we are running a little behind, and I want to make sure we get to the actual application and thinking through what does this look like, sound like for our schools and our classrooms. So that's the balanced assessment graphic. How many of you have seen this? Yeah, so this is a great visual to show how to move this flow chart, right? Of how we're moving kids in and between the layers. So we notice here that at the top starts with layer 1. And as we move down, we will see the arrows, and you can see on the left-hand side, they move up. So again, indicating that fluidity between those layers. Within layer 1, all means all. We're talking gen ed students, special ed students, our multilingual learners, how teachers and teams are working together to ensure students are receiving access to core instruction. This is also involves reteaching, differentiating, right, scaffolding, and small group instruction. Sometimes we might need to pull a group together if we're doing then I do, we do, you do, pull a small group that you've noticed throughout the instructional sequence might not be getting that standard or that skill. And so making sure that we are giving students the best possible foundation and core in layer 1. This also might look like for our TESOL endorsed teachers or ELD teachers, integrated versus designated ELD time. So it's also making sure that we're thinking that, or even in an inclusion setting, right? Access to layer 1 instruction. I circled this reteach and check for understanding because it doesn't really call out progress monitoring. Like you won't see that language here in this graphic. But I wanted to point out that right here where it says reteach and check for understanding, that's our progress monitoring with our core instruction, right? So then we move to layer 2, which is some students. So there's that language we were talking about before. In layer 2, this is where we start to individualize and target support for students, like many of us were just saying. It's aligned to those layer 1, those content standards, and it's about time and intensity for students to master those skills. So I always think of the analogy of like Swiss cheese, right? Swiss cheese has big holes and it has little holes. And so how are we filling in those little holes between layer 1 and 2? Whereas a bigger hole might need more of an intensive intervention in order to lead to mastery to that grade level content standard. And then we move from layer 2, right? You're determining, yes, I'm seeing progress, right? And how do we know? What does that look like, sound like? Then maybe we might say unlikely, or we might say no, the student has not retained, is not transferring skills. And that is when we move to layer 3, which is more, it's students who are grouped according to their skill need and not necessarily their grade level. So this is where we start thinking off grade level for those acquired academic skills that they need in order to transfer and be able to demonstrate grade level content. And again, the language here is specialized teachers to make sure that they're receiving, high quality science-based instruction. All right, so Brittany is going to explain this next part, what we're going to do with this information.
Yeah, so when it comes to that progress monitoring piece, or how we are assessing our students and seeing where they're at, I know that all of us have lots of different places where we pull from, depending on the schools that you work at, the curriculums that you work with, all of that kind of stuff. So I wanted you guys to have a few minutes. I think we're going to probably cut this down to about 5 minutes in a breakout room, just to become thought partners and think of the different ways that you progress monitor and the frequency of that. So when you open up your Jamboard, this is what it's going to look like. So again, you're going to go to the slide that matches your breakout room number. And so if you're on slide 1, you're working with phonology. So you're going to look at this little sticky note that's down there to tell you which kind of area or sub-skill you're working with. And I want you to try to think of the different ways that you monitor that. What are your interim assessments that monitor that skill, your monthly progress monitoring, your weekly progress monitoring, and kind of drill down. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so I will go ahead and open the rooms. I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes. Set my timer. Toby, do you want to be added to a room?
You don't have to, you can stay
I'm whichever works easiest. I'm good. Sorry for me being a little late there.
You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you, Deborah.
Sarah, were you assigned to a room?
See.
Yes, and then it disappeared.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, no, I see it. Never mind.
Oh,
I'm going.
okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.
All right.
You think 5 minutes is good, or is that going to be too much time?
No, I think we can, that's okay. Because we can,
Figure as long as we're in the walkthrough part, like the case study part by about 1:30-ish, we'll be good. You think so?
yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Because like we knew we weren't gonna get to layer 2, right? Like we hoped we would, but we want to stay in core layer 1, so that works. I think, yeah. Okay, let's see what they're doing.
Is this this isn't broadcasted to their breakout rooms, is it? I don't want to like confuse anyone.
It shouldn't be unless you selected the little box that says share to breakout room.
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So then you should be good. And then I know for this, like all your conversation here will be recorded as well, unless you pause the recording.
We did not. Let me pause.
Okay. think we're starting to all come back in. We have quite a few people still in their breakout rooms though. So as you're starting to come back, I'll kind of click through each one and you can kind of see maybe things that were in common, things that were different. Okay, I think we're all coming back now. Okay, so as you come back in, I'm going to kind of click through what we got on our Jamboard. And I want you to see things that maybe were in common, things that were different with what your group came up with. So overall, what did you guys notice as we move from less frequent to more frequent progress monitoring or assessment? Did anything change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like that other picture that you showed, you know, the less frequent is going to be yeah, more specialized.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
have more
so
options for weekly progress monitoring.
mm-hmm.
And I think too, like the weekly progress monitoring, the teachers tend to be more the ones giving it or checking it themselves. Whereas the, our interim assessments tend to be more standardized, computer checked, given those types of things as well.
Yeah, so we really wanted you guys to see that a lot of times, no matter what the subskill is, our big interim assessments are going to be a lot of the same, right? We've got those universal screeners, we've got iStation, we've got the NWEA or MAPS testing. A lot of those are going to be the same. And then as we get more frequent in our assessment, it's going to be more honed in. Okay.
Can I
So
ask really quick?
go ahead.
So Deborah just also mentioned too that even if we're implementing a highly qualified instructional material like Spire, right? Any teacher can get trained in implementing Spire. It doesn't have to be the special ed teacher or, a reading interventionist or what's the other one before Spire, what's it called? The phonological.
Nonsensible.
Thank you, Patty. Sounds sensible, right? I've seen kindergarten teachers trained in that, and that was designated as a label as a layer 3, but it could be any teacher, right? Yeah.
And so we want you guys to start thinking of moving your students through the layers as kind of like a funnel, right? The way that we assess them when we move them through the layers is a funnel. We are, again, talking about MLSS in the terms of structured literacy. So we really want to focus on those big portions of the strands of the reading rope. So we've got language comprehension, we've got word recognition, and we want to make sure we're assessing both of those pieces so that we can move our students towards skilled reading in a comprehensive way. So these are amended from letters. We kind of made them fit a more universal purpose, but this is kind of the flow chart that we can follow when we're trying to move our students into those layers. So this one is word recognition, the word recognition side of things. And so we're going to start with that interim or that benchmark assessment, like the ISIP or the MAPS testing, and try to identify first there which students are not performing at grade level. If they are performing at grade level, then we're going to keep them in that layer 1 instruction, maybe provide some enrichment if we're going above and beyond. And then if they're not, then we want to even more closely zoom in and try and figure out where that skill deficit is. So we want to assess oral reading fluency and analyze spelling errors. This is where our spelling screeners come in. Things like the letter spelling screener or Acadians or Dibbles, those kinds of things. And from there, then zoom in even more. So the students that don't perform at grade level on that assessment, then we're going to move into a phonics and word recognition survey or something like the PAST to assess further what skills we're seeing that deficit in. Or we're going to just kind of move on and teach them those fluency, those prerequisite grade level skills to get them to where they need to be. The whole time we want to make sure that we're progress monitoring all of these levels, all of these layers, but especially those kiddos who we are moving into that higher layer of intervention. So if we pulled iStation because iStation is something that we all kind of use, especially here in New Mexico. And we really wanted to drive home this depiction of the levels. So when we think about our kiddos who need the most intervention, it's those that fall below the 40th percentile. So when it comes to iStation, that means our kids who are in level 1 and level 2 of iStation. Now, the biggest thing to remember, or the question to kind of ask ourselves as educators is, are the results of that screener or that universal test, are they consistent with what we're seeing in the classroom? Because we know that sometimes those big overarching universal tests are not the be all end all. So you want to make sure that you're aligning that to what you're seeing in the classroom as well. For these level 1 and 2 kiddos, those are the ones that we want to start thinking about maybe a layer 2 or a layer 3 intervention. Level 3 and level 4, most of the time we can keep in that layer 1 intervention or reteaching. Sometimes the layer 3 kiddos, the level 3 kiddos might move into that layer 2 intervention. And then once we get to level 5, that's where we can start thinking about enrichment, which is also a type of layer 2 or layer 3 intervention. Again, it's not always because we're below grade level. Sometimes it's just that we need an intervention of some sort. So even if we're challenging our kiddos, we're pushing them to go above and beyond those grade level standards. That's a form of MLSS. The big thing to remember is if there's multiple skills that need to be addressed. When we think about, again, that reading rope, we know there are different things that go into the rope that allow us to create a skilled reader. So we want to make sure our kiddos can decode before they can encode, right? So we need to address them in the proper flow, right? We don't want to be working on writing skills with a kiddo who can't read CVCE words. So we want to make sure we're diagnosing those skills in a way that makes sense according to structured literacy. And then I wanted to ask you guys if you think right now you have a clear process for deciding on interventions for your students. So within the schools that you work with or within your own team, do you feel like you have a really clear protocol for how to move your students through those layers or place your students in those layers? Yep, you can put it in the chat. Yes, no, maybe, or you can come up and tell us about it. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of no's. Does anybody want to elaborate on that? Or yes, you can elaborate on that as well.
We have pretty good yes to the placing. The teachers use the letter survey, and it's called targeted instruction instead of intervention, just because the groups are kind of big and they do it by grade level. But we have like this big spreadsheet, and we sorted the kids in the beginning of the year based on different skills. And then like every 9 to 12 weeks, depending on breaks, they do the letter survey again, but just the subtests of what their group was working on. And then they decide like which kids are ready to move to like the next more complex phonics concept. And most people are using West Virginia phonics. And so like it seems like people are progressing. Not every grade levels is doing exactly that, but some people are like using foundations or UFly, but in general, that's the way it's moving, but there's no like actual goal to stop layer 2 because just how far behind they felt. So what they're doing is that they're changing their instruction, but they still have that time carved out.
And that's a great point, Kendra, about can a student be a layer 2 student for a while? Yeah, I mean, they might start for whatever reason, lack of instruction for that student might be in a first grade classroom, but they might be a layer 2 kiddo all year long moving into second grade, right? And that's okay, because we want to ensure that we're responding to their needs and giving them what they need in order to accelerate that learning. And so it's hard to quantify time and frequency, right? But I think where that helps teachers see it more, make it more tangible, is when we quantify it and we progress monitor, right? We see it, we can touch it a little bit better.
Can I interject? I think a disconnect again at my school is maybe they are placing them well now that I'm hearing Kendra speak. They're also keeping kids in for long periods of time, but not really changing that instruction. And so I think that's kind of what I'm seeing. So they're just keeping them all year, but they're the same goals. There's not really any kind of adjustment. And so that's where it's not a good thing.
And so we're going to kind of walk through a protocol that will really allow us to see and know what that mastery will look like, so that it is more clear when it's time to move students to a different layer or move on to a different skill, that kind of thing. Okay, so we also have the same kind of flowchart for language comprehension and writing. This is the same kind of thing. Here we're going to start with oral reading fluency, because we know that that's kind of the all-encompassing skill. And those kiddos who aren't performing well on the oral reading fluency, then we're going to go on to assess vocabulary and comprehension. And vocabulary and comprehension is made up of a lot of sub-skills. So these green little rectangles down here kind of outline those sub-skills and what can go into those interventions. A big thing to notice on this end is that a lot of times this is going to be based on your things that you're seeing in your classroom. We don't have as many screeners to look at these skills on a wider lens. We do have vocabulary screeners, and some of the oral reading fluency tests have comprehension questions that go along with them. But a lot of the strategies like sentence comprehension or written expression are going to be things that we see on a classroom level. And so those data points might look a little bit different for this one. Any questions about this kind of side of things?
The other thing to consider too is, we like to have a tool for our teachers to use or on our campuses that's visual, that everybody knows, like, this is what we're doing as a data-driven school, like our culture, right, our system. So having a visual like this for teachers to see might be helpful, right? Creating that with your specific screeners and tools that you're using on your campuses. So just something to think about there. As far as having something more concrete.
And a lot of times our assessments that we're using, they assess both sides of things, right? So they're not only assessing language comprehension, they're not only assessing word recognition. And so we don't have to pull those sides apart. We're kind of assessing them at the same time and then focusing and funneling in depending on where we're seeing the most difficulty with students. Okay, so Ada is going to kind of walk you guys through more of a protocol of this. So I will give it over to her.
Okay. So now let's get to the implementation and what this could look like, sound like, right? So that was something on your feedback forms that you wanted to see, like could this look like at the classroom level? So in the chat, Brittany's going to put the 3rd grade class data. This may or may not be real. For privacy sakes, but you will see, oh, can you go back a slide, Brittany? Thank you. We're gonna look at this data in terms of these 4 PLC questions. Has anyone seen these before? Use them in PLCs. They come from Rick DeFore. They're the 4 critical questions of a PLC. Because oftentimes when we come together to collaborate, time is money, right? We've got very limited time to collaborate. We've got maybe 45 minutes to an hour to look at data, get to planning, right? And then think about what I'm going to do next week in my classroom. So I always like to tell my grade levels, keep it simple, right? What do we want all kids to know and be able to say and do? How will we know? So this is when we get to that strategy instructional level. Like, what does it look like, sound like when I can say a student can decode multi-syllable words? Like, let's get specific. How will we respond when students have not shown mastery? So that's that anticipatory step of us thinking through differentiation for all our kids, right? I know, like when we were pre-service teachers and we went through how do we lesson plan, it's that pyramid of all, some, and few, right? Thinking through what do I want all kids to be able to master for this particular standard. And then of course thinking to extend and enrich. So how will we extend the learning for our students that are showing mastery? I know sometimes it's hard to think in that widespread of going from gifted, right, to more of our struggling readers and writers. So now Brittany's going to show you the data sheet. So it looks like this. So you're going to see lots of tabs, and I promise you I'm going to give you time to look at this. I'm not just going to throw it at you. So standards, right? We want to make sure that we are staying aligned to content standards. Here you'll see this was created in a previous district that I worked for that had essential standards. So I think it's important that whenever we're planning, this is out on the table, right? So we know print concepts we don't have in 3rd grade. So we're going to scroll down and really focus in on standard 3, which is phonics and word recognition. And so you can see what I also like about this tool is that you can look before and then you can look after. So if we're thinking all kids, right, if they've mastered that standard by February, March of 3rd grade, what can I do to help extend for those kiddos? And then the second tab you're going to see are our language standards, because our language standards, though, if you look at language standard 2, this is where we get into the spelling and writing piece, right? Oftentimes when we are teaching decoding skills, we're also teaching encoding, right? Decoding and encoding go hand in hand. I heard a quote once that said, reading is like breathing in and writing is like breathing out, right? We don't want just kids to hold their breath and just practice those reading skills. We want to make sure that they're also encoding and showing that through spelling and writing. So language standard 2, writing for 3rd grade, says use conventional spelling. So we're going to see words like spell, use, right, demonstrate, that they can not only know how to decode, but also encode. Okay, so that's why I want to show language standards. I feel like these standards get left out a lot, and these are my favorite standards of all time. Moving on to the next tab, you're going to see here's this 3rd grade's overall February classroom data. And looking at this, we can see spelling is of concern, right? And then on the right-hand side, you can see that chart of how kiddos have been moving along the months in terms of spelling. So pretty flatlined, would you agree? Yeah. The next tab has the Letters Advanced Spelling Screener. So this is the whole class here. You'll see the orthographic features at the top, right? So moving from short vowels, so 2nd row, from short vowels all the way through. So this is starting with our alphabetic code, right? And then we're moving to trigraphs, long vowels, other vowels. So that's within word patterns. And then we're moving to more complex orthographic features and moving to that derivational stage, right? So you can see here at the top, it'll say, so for short vowels, there are 5 words. Those 5 words are listed at the very bottom where it says words that make up that feature. So in short vowels, you'll see the word that the students had to spell were cap, chip, shut, tent, and dropping. The words in red indicate the words that most students missed within that specific orthographic feature. So this was done in January, right? Because we give this is interim data. along with our iStation data to drill down sort of specifically what orthographic features we're still struggling with as a class. And the yellow highlight indicates not mastery. So on this screener, they can only miss one, right? All right, the next tab, so we're triangulating this data. We got all the data here. We see for this third grade class what they're currently working on in core curriculum. So they use foundations. They're currently on unit 8. They've just taught consonant LE and shun. And so you can see here students again, A through V, how they did on that weekly spelling list. So the words in red again are the words that most often those kiddos missed. Other information for us to know is how many special ed students there are in that classroom. So gifted to needing speech or IEP services. We've got 6 multilingual learners as well, and then 1 BIP in this classroom. So let's give you, let's say about 5 minutes to kind of digest all this, yeah? So we know where they're at in core, right? We know what standard they should be working on. And we're going to be thinking about these 4 questions. What is it that we want all students to be able to know and do at this point, third grade classroom in February-ish, March-ish?
And you guys can turn your camera off, flip through the tabs, anything you need to do to digest all that information. And we'll set our timer for 5 minutes.
Okay, has it been 5 minutes, Brittany? Yes?
There's about a minute left. So if you guys are done, if you want to go ahead and type done in the chat or just turn your camera back on, let us know that you're ready.
So we're just thinking about the first question, yeah? So Brittany's going to type some ideas as we think through this. So at this point in the year, knowing what we're teaching in core instruction, what standard, phonics or language, are we focusing on? And what do they need to be able to show for that standard? You can unmute or just type it in the chat. So we're working on a phonics standard.
And those are those first two tabs too for the third grade class. That's kind of the standards that we're working with. The ones in yellow.
So we're working on consonant, LE, and shun. Okay. Oh no, did I scare you guys? Where are you? All right, I'll just keep moving along and I'll do a think aloud. How about that? So let's think let me think about this. So if I'm looking at my standards, they're working on phonics standard 3, and they're looking at decoding multisyllabic words. Would you agree? Yes. 3C. Is LE considered a suffix? It's a syllable type, right? Is it a Latin suffix? Are we doing derivational suffixes at this point? Right, T-I-O-N, S-I-O-N. Okay, now thinking about that, because that's my phonics standard, I might want to look at a language standard too and see what am I working on here. So the language standard says use spelling patterns and generalization in writing words. So by third grade, they should have been exposed to all of the patterns, right? They should have been exposed to the code of English by the end of second grade. And so I want to be seeing in their spelling a grapheme that matches a phoneme in some way, right? So if I'm doing let's say for simple terms like fish, right? Maybe the kid is putting for PHISH. I don't know that they would do that in third grade, but I'm just saying, right? I want to see a grapheme that correlates to a phoneme. So that is what that conventional spelling means, right? And using spelling patterns and general rules to know how am I supposed to be spelling these words with LE and TION. Okay, when I go to the second question, how do we know all students have shown mastery of this skill? When we think of decoding skills, what do I want to see kiddos doing when they're reading multisyllabic words? What are they saying? What are they doing? So think verbs. Can they identify vowels?
I'd want them to count the vowels and
Yeah.
then look for the consonant patterns, especially if they have been introduced to this particular syllable pattern, and possibly underline it to
Right.
break it up.
Even if if I've got students at a 1-syllable level, right? I still want them to be able to annotate vowels. Can you find them? Can you identify them, annotate them, right? Be able to say how many syllables there are in a word. Looking at that spelling screener, right? The letter screener, I've got kiddos still struggling with short vowels, right? So even if I give them a multisyllabic word, I still want them to be able to show me they can find a short vowel in that word, right? So we're differentiating that support. within layer 1. What else do I want to see them doing with multisyllabic words? So if the focus is on suffixes, right? A blending routine that helps them find that suffix in the word, right? And be able to chunk and decode those words. Are they decoding by phonemes? Are they decoding by syllable type, right? Yeah.
Also, since it's final stable, it's always final and it's always unaccented. So some kind of routine to know what's the accented syllable, what's the unaccented syllable.
Yes, in 3rd grade, right? Great point, Kendall. Yeah. So now this is also where we're pulling in that letters
Should
knowledge.
also be able to identify a syllable break depending on the kind of thing they're looking for. So if they're looking for a shun, like shun, then they should know TION is the syllable break's going to happen right before that. If they're looking for a syllable break LE, they should know the consonant LE, the syllable break will be right before that in order to chunk that even better.
Right. Great point. So now let's think, so this is what we want to see kiddos doing, right? Doing, saying, I'm observing, I'm taking, observational notes, I'm checking, yep, they got it, no, they don't got it. How am I going to respond if I see a student who is struggling with this, right? Has not shown mastery of, they can't annotate the vowel, they can't show me where the suffix is, they can't determine where the stress syllable is. What scaffolds can I put into place for those kiddos? So these might be, if you're looking at our iStation, right? These are our reds. We've got some kiddos still learning letter knowledge, right? I've got kiddos still working on phonemic awareness skills. Great. Yes. Coding chart. So some sort of visual tool to help them. Use your sound spelling walls, right? Some way for kids who are struggling learners might not be able to hold, right? All that information. So is there a visual tool that we can use to help them remember the rules or the process?
Ada, one of the ones I've learned was the Velcro acronym for your syllable types. Vowel, silent E, LE, closed, R controlled, open, Velcro.
Yeah, great. That's a great mnemonic, right? I've also seen programs like from 95% Group that use a visual tool for syllable type. So like closed, open, right? R controlled, LE, they're circling. So some sort of visual cue for kiddos. When you look at the word lists, right, that students, the weekly spelling tests, differentiating the word list, right? If I look at my consonant LE, most of my kiddos in this class got table right. That's a 2-syllable word, right? Open syllable with consonant LE. So differentiating my word list is a great way to say, okay, we're going to start with some 2-syllable words. And then for my higher, more advanced kids, I might do more multisyllabic words like, I don't know, sparkle. Maybe that's not a good one. Maybe I was thinking of shun. So like under the shun suffix, there was more 3-syllable words than 2-syllable words. So that might be another great way to differentiate for kiddos who are not needing more support or maybe more scaffolding with accessing grade level content. Yeah, using multi-sensory tools like index cards, that's great. Okay, and then for the students that are learning it, so like are my students T, U, and V who are showing mastery of these skills, how might I extend this? So this is where looking at that standards doc for phonics, right? So if I'm looking at my 3rd grade phonics skill and I look at 4th grade, like what is it that they have to do in 4th grade to help prepare them for that, right? So location patterns, morphology, right? Going into not only decoding and identifying, but they have to know, they have to understand how that might change the word. Maybe it's more of, it's changing a noun, a verb to a noun, right? When we add TION, like what's the part of speech that's changing there. So morphology, yes, roots and affixes. Thank you. Did I say something different? I apologize. I was looking at the time and I panicked because we have 2 minutes. So we were hoping to go through this process again with the layer 2 and then thinking of how do we create, like you were saying, an action plan. So if we're providing differentiated scaffolded support in layer 1 so that all kids can access core content, right? Then what does a reteach look like? What does then, do I need to go to a layer 2 intervention and build in more specific skills for these kiddos? And then how much time is that going to take me? Right? So if I look at that screener and I see my lows are struggling with short vowel I and E, how long should that take me for a kiddo to master those 2 skills, right? In conjunction with what I'm doing in layer 1. So we ran out of time because this was as Brittany said, a whole elephant to go through. So again, this is just one process, one way to take all those data points, right? We know we say we got to triangulate data, but how do we do this in an effective, timely way? And collaborate amongst all different types of teachers. So
Yeah, and so kind of the big takeaways were that we want to make sure we're using multiple points of data. We want to make sure that communication and that collaboration is happening between the teachers, the interventionists, the grade level team. We're all communicating on what those data points should look like and what we're doing with them. We want to use those reliable and valid assessments to drive our instruction, and we want to make sure that our assessment is calibrated across the grade level, across the school, across the team, so that we all have common language when we're talking about those layers of instruction. I know that was a lot, so we did create kind of a parking lot, and we also do have a PLC for the coaches at 2:15 that we'll kind of dive further into this subject. The big thing is there's going to be a different